today, companies use what is called a traditional firewall. And a firewall allows you a block or allow strategy. Either I allow Dhillon to use Box or I don't. There is no in between. Where Netskope comes in is we allow the in between. So what we say is if Dhillon wants to use Box, we can say, Dhillon, you're allowed to upload to Box, but you are not allowed to share from Box. That's how granular you can get. Unfortunately, working from home has opened up a lot of security issues because now to work from home, you need to use cloud-based SaaS applications. In order to use those, they are not protected unless the organization went out and bought licenses specifically for that application. So today, most people still use their personal accounts like OneDrive and G Suite and Box and Slack and all these other tools that we do with sharing. Today, you need to put something in place. If you're there's two ways to do it. You either allow the employee to do it or you don't. And that's unfortunately the way they work today. We say, allow the users to use the apps they want, but we can prevent risky behavior and we can start dictating behavior on what you want the user to do in that specific application.
I also think it's a two-way street. There's also privacy of the individuals. I'm now working from home for my company, but this is also my castle. How do we make sure that I'm not being micromanaged using certain applications like Slack and others that can potentially track my every movement on my mouse? And for example, the software we're using today, Zoom, did an update. We can talk about this a little later, but one of their updates would kind of track a person being in front of the camera. And when the person wasn't in front of the camera, it was kind of, a ping was sent to the host. So how can we make sure that we're also not invading on the privacy of the individual while still making sure the economy functions?
So I can take that one. This is more of a governance question. So first of all, it goes back to what are the policies and procedures of your organization? And does it have a specific work from home policy? And in that policy, is privacy covered? So definitely it is very important to highlight in an organization, what are the parameters where individual information and employee information is being used and where it cannot be used. That should be specifically be highlighted. Once that is done, then how is that protected? So that's from an organization point of view. But I definitely think that from a personal point of view, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that this is a changed environment and we have to take some common sense measures, which cybersecurity, cyber hygiene is something about. So for example, I do have a physical shield on my camera. So when I'm not in a meeting, I do cover my camera. Similarly, I do make sure that I do not use my home computer for work activities, but obviously there are some limitations for people on that. So there are some common sense measures which you can take, but definitely from an organizational point of view, governance policies and procedures should highlight that work from home policy should be there and privacy should be definitely be clarified on how employees are being looked at.
I'll expand. Sorry, Michael.
No, I'm saying I totally agree. It's definitely, when it comes to that, it is definitely a governance and common sense model.
And that really leads nicely into the next question, which was, we are in, hopefully in a few months or weeks time, in a post-COVID era, even though there is a second phase everyone's talking about coming our way sometime in the fall. But, back in November of last year, we did a cybersecurity conference. We launched the Cyber Kit. When do we start to kind of, start discussing governance and policies and procedures? When is it a good time to be talking about cybersecurity awareness training and incident response plans? Because AJ, you just talked about how governance is important to protect the individual working from home, but I'm pretty sure most of us that are on this call literally ran out of the office and may not have gone back for the past 3 to 4 weeks. And knowing our sector, I'd be surprised to know if the majority actually had, a policy in place for working from home and what privacy means in that. So what's the message as we scramble to make sure we're doing the right things and individuals are continuing to being able to be productive from home? What are the best practices when we talk about governance and training and continuity plans?
Well, as far as this COVID-19 situation and the initial work from home, when that happened, there were two kinds of companies. One who were prepared for it and the others who were not. So the ones who were prepared were those who had good cyber governance policies. So what I mean is, what was the business continuity policy of any organization? So any organization which has worked on business continuity will have a disaster recovery plan, will have a plan where what happens if your office environment is not available. So many organizations which had a good business continuity plan, they just fell back on that and they were seamless and up and running the next day. But the organizations which did not have that, obviously they are still challenged and they are still looking at how to make sure that they are secure in this environment. So when should we have governance, cyber governance in place? Well, it should be yesterday, because cyber governance enables you to make sure that you are able to handle such situations. That is the aim of cyber governance. It is the aim to protect against incidents in any environment. So what is the incident response plan of any organization today? I was looking at some data here, and many organizations do not have a multi-factor authentication for remote connectivity. So people are still using the single username password to log in remotely. But do organizations need multi-factor authentication while connecting remotely? So your password policy, your remote access policy, your acceptable use policy. So there are many policies and procedures which need to be put in place. And that's what frameworks like NIST, CSF, and ISO 21434 actually ensure is implemented.
Yeah, and from a technology standpoint, a lot of discussions that I'm having with companies now is they are truly going to rethink how they have things architected today back on-prem. And what I mean by that is they are realizing that the new world we live in, which is a cloud world, a SaaS world, we're all using SaaS application on our mobile devices. The way they're architected today is not the world of cloud. So we are starting to see companies start to look at different ways to architect their network so that they can be more cloud ready. And that was, like I said, prior to COVID, but this has just amped up everything. And Gartner is an authority in security, and they recently put out a paper which is called SASE. And SASE is another one of these technology acronyms we all use in our world, but it means secure access, secure edge. And what Gartner is saying is, you need to stop worrying and investing about your four walls at your organization. You need to protect where the data is, and where the data is where the user is. So they're saying the future of investing in your physical infrastructure will change dramatically. And these are the discussions I'm having with companies all the way from, like I said, users that are 100 employees, all the way to one of our largest customers in Canada here, that's 81,000 users. Doesn't matter what industry, they are all starting to realize that the way they're architected today does not support the future. And we're starting to see a lot of conversations around that.
Excellent. So just a reminder for those that are listening in, any questions can be asked through the chat link at the bottom of the Zoom window. Their questions will become available to myself and the panelists, and we'll share your questions. So thank you for that. So, being SASE and changing the architecture, the physical architecture, let's just focus on our sector, the automotive sector, is something that we're going through the process, I think from the OEM level all the way through the tiers. But you know, how important is training, cyber training? And is it one of those where if I took some cyber training for phishing and ransomware and whale attacking and malware 3 years ago, you know, can I put that certificate up behind my chair and off I continue to go in life? Or does it need to be something that's kind of ongoing? You know, let's face it, let's talk openly about the software we're using today, Zoom. You know, there is talk of 500,000 accounts that have found their way to the, you know, to the darker reaches of the cyber world. You know, there were challenges that this company faced, and they had to do 2 software updates within a period of 5 days last week. You know, what does training mean? And in this COVID era, how important is it? And how can a company schedule training for their employees as they work from home? Again, talking about the 3 scenarios, you know, the send and receive emails all the way through to the C-suite. How can we protect our employees and our data?
Michael, you want to go first?
You're on mute again.
I kind of chuckled, Colin, when you said, you know, something I took 3 years ago. It constantly changes.
Absolutely.
And I'll give you an example. I mean, even working for, you know, I work at Netscope, we're 1,000 employees worldwide. Every year, and we're in technology, we are mandated to take certain classes that we have to be up to date with cybersecurity laws and how you try to avoid clicking on the wrong link, or how you not to share information. So I think that never stops. And I think every organization, and AJ will probably have a better view of this because he helps organizations with this, but there's got to be constant training. You just can't train day 1 and by day 50, you're done. I mean, the technology, as we know, I mean, you see technology change just in the last 5 years. Malware and hackers and all, they change daily. I mean, look at all just the stuff around COVID. I mean, COVID now has, you know, people are so worried about COVID, they're getting links for jobs and they're clicking on wrong information, and people, you know, these hackers will take advantage of the worst of times, right? So I will say that a company like mine constantly, and we're in tech, they're constantly making us take, you know, programs that you sign up for. But AJ can do a better job because I know that he actually helps companies with doing this on a daily basis.
Yes. So yes, my company CloudGRC does offer cybersecurity awareness training, but I would say that it's rather than a training, it's an awareness program. So it's bigger than just going through some online portal and going through a training. First of all, it should be an annual program. But the second thing is, once you go through those modules, is your behavior same or has it changed? So what we do through our portal is we actually send out phishing emails, fake phishing emails to those people who have taken the course. And then if they click on it, we can actually send out a report to the senior management showing that this month, let's say 30% of your workforce actually clicked on a phishing email. So they need more training, more awareness. But then it is bigger than that. What is the incentive of the workforce to actually change their mindset, to actually change the culture? So there has to be some incentives. There has to be, from the senior management, there has to be recognition of the change in mindset. There has to be recognition of people who are reporting maybe phishing emails, things like that. So the whole program has to be developed, and it has to be a holistic program. The other thing, Colin, which I wanted to say, you brought up Zoom, and I have this one big frustration, and that is that, like, larger companies like Zoom and Facebook earlier was a good example. They become a pretty big company, but they don't take cyber seriously. And only when something like this happens, they start considering cybersecurity. So I think there is a huge need for education and for awareness of cyber at the highest levels, at the C-level, at the board, and of course through the APMA with our conference and through our webinars and podcasts, we have taken a lead role in ensuring that we at least get the information out there so our members are aware of this critical requirement.
And I'd like to kind of, reference ISO 21434. People shouldn't think that that policy, that standard, which everyone will now have to look at meeting if they are using technology that's kind of makes its way to a vehicle, that it will not tell you to do annual training. Do not expect, this has to be, AJ, as you have been telling us, this has to be a part of your governance model at your company. But I think the biggest challenge we face in the auto sector as the vehicle becomes so technology heavy, as we start to implement IoT products and software, connecting, multitudes of individuals and hardware, speaking to hardware, how do we make sure that it's all protected? How do we make sure that we aren't naive and open? And phishing and ransomware are easy ones. Those are emails which we all get. And let's face it, hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars are lost by companies when they're actually held to ransom. But do we think that this, working from home is actually going to, remote access, is this going to make things better or worse? I think we know the answer, but I'll still put it out there.
Yeah, so I think the whole COVID-19 situation has actually just accelerated our dependence on technology and remote work. As you mentioned earlier, there was still a significant number of people who were doing remote work in US. So the whole situation is ensuring that our reliance on remote work, and I think something which connected and autonomous vehicles also would have enabled, and smart cities are also enabling, is the connectivity. So that all actually is ensuring that we have to look at cyber from a governance perspective, and we have to look at the controls which are in place. The whole challenge is whether we can do it quickly enough and we can secure our data, or we will continue to have these breaches, and can we afford these breaches? And I also wanted to highlight the supply chain. So we have been talking about risk assessment. What about the risk assessment of all the suppliers? So if you are an OEM and you have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 suppliers, what about their cyber risk assessment? So that's something to also consider.
So, but will this current situation help to speed up? Is it a bit of a blessing in disguise when it comes to cybersecurity? Michael, maybe it's something you can comment on. Has Netscope? Are you getting more calls? Are you busier because of the current situation?
Yeah, we were a very busy company prior to the situation. But yes, this is definitely accelerated, and it goes back to customers now. It's something we've been preaching as a company for 5 years. Customers are looking at a direct to cloud model. Stop backhauling traffic all the way back to on-prem when you can go direct to cloud and allow your employees to work on-prem and wherever they want in the world. That has accelerated 10x. Because again, it goes back to why am I as a company, no matter how big I am, investing on-prem infrastructure that can't help with the remote worker. And prior to COVID, people were already going, in the wild with SaaS applications. I mean, it's nothing new. This is now proven to the organizations. Okay, before they were on-prem, I wasn't so worried. Now they're at home. I definitely know they're using applications. And it doesn't matter if it's HR, if it's finance, if it's ops, they're all using applications to be more successful and to do their jobs better. Now companies are saying, okay, this is going to be the future. We now need to make sure that we secure those users, because the direct to cloud model is the way every organization in the world is going. It's no longer backhauling traffic back to headquarters to protect the user. That's going to go away. And that goes back to Gartner about saying the future is SASE. You now need to worry about the user, not your four walls. Because today, the biggest thing for a company is data. Data is king. That's where all your trade secrets are. That's where all your info is. That's where all your third-party info is. That's where all your client information is. So today, if that's what the crown jewel of an organization is, you now need to protect where the data is. Forget about the four walls, because it's all about the data.
And so just expanding on that kind of, perimeter-less security architecture that you're describing there, Michael. Let me give you a scenario. In the auto sector, all the way from the GTA here in the Toronto region down to Windsor and into Detroit, you will find households where both the husband and the wife or the partners are working for competitors. One's working for a Magna and the other one's working for an ABC Group Technologies, let's say. We're now working from home. How do we protect, let's kind of, if you can talk about biometrics and identity management and encryption, how do you make sure that trade secrets in a household are not being shared? And I'm not talking about one set of individuals. I personally know at least 3 or 4 scenarios of that similar kind of case. So what else can we add in, when it comes to protecting the data that is on your system at home? What's the company got to do, especially when it comes to IP?
So again, really good question. And this is a big use case that we solve. Here, I'll give you a great use case. So Starbucks is one of our biggest customers, and their concern was their baristas inside each of their stores would be accessing their Office 365 instance from a shared computer inside the store. So individuals would look at their pay stubs or maybe their work schedules. Their concern was, if that's not a company-owned device, how they might now download to that shared computer their pay stub. Well, we don't want to allow that. So today, what we did for them is we can say, we can also provide you with security to allow that unmanaged device to be fully inspected without the user knowing. And today, every barista around the world comes through our cloud to protect them for that. Unfortunately, it goes back to what AJ says. It comes back to common sense and what not to share. Today, if you're using a cloud application, you can do whatever you want with it, unless it's corporately owned. But 98% of cloud traffic that Netscope finds in an organization is what we call unsanctioned, which means that buzzword shadow IT. Most organizations are not aware of 90% of the apps that their employees are using. And this was prior to COVID. So the concern now is, how do I ensure them being at home, they have free reign on everything? Unless you're governing and managing that data, unfortunately, it goes back to the common sense rule that AJ said. You as a user have to ensure that if I'm downloading something from AMA on this device, I can't share it over the internet to another SaaS application where someone might have a share access to, right? So that's the problem. Sometimes you hear about Slack channels. Slack is a big tool that is now used within organizations, especially around automotive, because this is where a lot of the developers talk and how they share data. The problem is, if you have a person, how do you stop someone from using their personal Slack channel and maybe send some personal information? Unfortunately, you can't unless you have a technology in place that governs it, or the actual company sanctions that application to be their application of choice for shared storage or for collaboration. So most companies need to decide what is the application you want to standardize on for sharing information. And we don't see that a lot today, but that is changing.
Yeah, and Colin, this is a huge issue. A company or a large company, 10,000 to 50,000 employees, uses 3,000 to 5,000 cloud SaaS apps. So it's a huge issue, and people don't know that those apps are being used. So one of the things which is important is to know what apps your organization is using and who is using that. So that's right now, for most organizations, that is not something where the numbers are not there, the data is not there. So that is almost the first step. The other thing you talked about, biometrics and identity management. So that definitely is a major area. And I earlier mentioned multi-factor authentication. So definitely you have to make sure that for specific apps, multi-factor authentication is being used. What that means is you're using something you know, which is your password, and something you have, which might be an app on your cell phone, which is being sent a code or something like that. So, and of course, the next step is something you are, which is a biometric. So for apps which are sensitive, definitely you have to use multi-factor authentication.
It is definitely an interesting time. I think the positive news has been, I haven't seen a lot of bad news about our sector, especially being hit by black hat folks or, you know, national sponsored cyber attacks to our sector. You know, there was a survey released last month by CSO Pandemic Impact Survey, and they threw out some stats, and I just want to share them with yourselves and everyone listening, and then maybe ask some questions as far as short-term and long-term solutions as we go through this pandemic. In the US, again, these are all US numbers. On average, there are over 22% of companies have to acquire new security solutions and services in order to address this new work dynamic. And so, you know, that sounds to me like a real-time figure. 22% have added new security solutions and services. Over 60% of them express greater concern about attacks targeting work-from-home employees. So, you know, if we ask what's keeping some of the C-suite folk up at night, it is the fact that, are my employees even working? That's just a joke. But it's the fact that, you know, are they open to attacks? And 26% have seen an increase in the volume, severity, and or the scope of cyber attacks since mid-March. So what are our short-term and long-term solutions? Because there are those sectors and segments in the economy that are saying that some of their employees may actually never go back to work. Remote work may be an option that they continue to pursue. Yet, how do we make sure, as both of you have alluded to, and I feel confirmed, that we are working through the cloud, these kind of old perimeter kind of security architectures of networks and having, you know, physical, you know, firewalls around you when you were in a workplace are maybe becoming the thing of the past for some employees. What are some of the solutions that companies need to be addressing? And AJ, I'll also, you know, throw in governance again, because I think it's going to be an important part. And like, how can those listening think about the step-by-step options to protect their employees, which in theory are protecting their companies?
Yeah, so I think I'll put this in the three categories: people, process, and technology. And I'll add a fourth one, which is leadership. So from a people perspective, organizations now have to invest in their employees. From a cyber perspective, they have to make sure they have cybersecurity awareness programs. They have to make sure that their cyber SMEs are well trained. They have to make sure that incentives are there to recognize good cyber hygiene. So the cultural mindset, that has to be changed. From a processes point of view is the entire governance framework. So you have to look at maybe NIST, CSF is a good framework, but ISO 21434 is definitely for the auto sector. But those frameworks basically actually give you governance guidelines. So my question is, what is the overall cybersecurity policy of any organization? Do you have one? If you have one, then do you have below that other policies and procedures? So that's there. And from a technology perspective, definitely you have to look at unique and innovative solutions such as Netscope. Definitely is one of those. And there are other solutions out there which you have to look at. But the most important thing, and organizations will actually survive and thrive because of that during this phase, is leadership. The question is, who is the cybersecurity leader of your organization? Do you have a single person, like a chief information security officer, who is responsible for enabling cyber in your organization. I know organizations who have great cybersecurity leaders, and during this phase when the business continuity plan kicked in, they were actually leading the organization, and they made sure that the company moves seamlessly to a work from home environment. So that definitely is a very important area also.
Yeah, and to go back to those numbers you shared, Colin, I think it's reconfirmed my message during this presentation is those numbers reconfirm again that companies, especially C-suite, and that's who I basically talk to day in and day out, they are now realizing that they need to rethink the way their organization does business. It has fast-tracked the way they realize they are moving to cloud. They knew they were there before, the business just accelerated it. And we have to stop investing on older technologies and realize that the way forward is to allow remote work, because I think it's going to become more and more of the norm. But it also prepares us for something in the future again. No one wants to get caught again in this situation. That's one of the biggest things the C-level say is, hey, when I get back to work, no matter how long it takes again for, let's hope this never happens again, but I never want to be in this situation where it does. And that requires a new way of thinking. And that's what the C-suite people are going through right now, day in and day out.
And Michael, if we talk about the auto sector specifically, as AJ kind of alluded to, what is your framework of cyber security governance? What is your leadership? Are we still seeing cybersecurity falling on the laps of the IT departments? Are you still meeting folks that are from the IT department versus securities department? Like, could you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, good question. I would say that when it comes to cybersecurity and security, there has been in the last 5 years, a massive investment into those areas of companies. So like AJ said, a lot of larger organizations, so some of the larger manufacturers I deal with in the world, they have a chief information security officer, a chief information data officer. So you're seeing a lot of those roles. On the smaller companies, they realize the importance of cybersecurity. So they're actually hiring what they call a chief information security officer. So they might not have enough money to hire someone on-prem and pay them some of the big bucks that some of these guys want. But there are virtual teams out there that will go to companies and help assist in becoming their day-to-day CISO. But when it comes to security, we see that. But what we're starting to see now is security and networking are working a lot more closely together, because security wants to implement a solution. You still need the blessing of the network people to say, okay, how are we going to implement what the framework is of what the security guy wants or gal? So that's what we typically see.
So just as keeping an eye on the time, we're 4 minutes away. A question from the audience is to yourselves. What are some of the steps a company should take right now if employees working from home due to COVID-19 caught them off guard? It was something we kind of touched upon briefly, but what are some of the best practices companies can do and employees as they work from home today? I.e., should they be using Zoom, Michael? So and so and so. And I chuckle because you and I talked about this the other day.
Yep. AJ, I'll let you take that because I know you deal with this a lot day in and day out helping companies. So I'll let you handle that one.
Yeah, so I think there are a few things they can do. First of all, they need to look at endpoint security. So what are the systems which employees are using from home? So if it is their personal computers, it would be different. But if it is their company corporate computers, then definitely there would be some endpoint security built into that. They have to look at multi-factor authentication, as I mentioned, for specific apps. They have to look at the vendor access. So what are the vendors, and do they need remote access to the company system? They have to look at the cloud infrastructure. So what is the cloud infrastructure, and what are the SaaS apps which they are using? They have to look at the corporate dependencies. So what are the external systems which the company is using, or what external systems might be accessing the company system? And we did mention, for example, the cybersecurity awareness program. That is definitely very important for the employees. So And I think one more in this particular situation is the incident response plan. Let's say if there is a cyber incident right now, let's say there's a phishing attack, let's say there's a breach, does the employee know who to call? And that goes back to the ownership and responsibility of cyber. So for all employees in a company, do they know who is the person responsible or who is the team responsible in case of a cyber incident right now? So those are some of the things which the organization can do.
Right, great. And again, you know, that pretty much wraps it up for the formal questions. If there's any insight that both of you would like to bestow upon us listening, please do. Also, you know, feel free to share your contact details verbally. They will be made available on the apma.ca website. But Michael, any last kind of second thoughts?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. And to everyone on the phone, I mean, to me, the most important thing now is keep yourself and your family safe, and we'll get through this and the world will go on. So just be safe out there and we'll get through this.
AJ?
Yeah, I think for me, why I'm passionate about cyber is because it adds value to people, to organizations, to societies. And especially in this situation today, I really believe that cyber can add a lot of value and ensure that we not only recover from this particular situation, but ensure that in the long term, our societies remain viable, our infrastructure is protected, and we, as Michael said, stays safe and healthy. Healthcare is another area where cyber becomes very important right now.
Thank you, AJ from CloudGRC, and thank you, Michael from Netscope. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to the webinar on best practices for remote access and working from home. This is a wrap. Thank you very much. And thank you on behalf of the APMA. Bye-bye.